More than 30 members of the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce met up with several local legislators at the Dorset Inn on Monday, February 27th, for a legislative breakfast hosted by the Chamber of Commerce to allow their members to hear directly from several state representatives and one state senator about the progress of several pieces of legislation they've been working on or following. Housing, paid family leave, the Clean Heat Standard, renamed the Affordable Heating Act this year, education issues, and workforce issues in general dominated the presentations and the discussion afterwards. Each legislator had a few minutes to talk about what they were working on up in Montpelier before a question and answer segment kicked in.
This has been, I think, already one of the more pivotal sessions that I've seen over the last couple of years. There is a lot happening up in Montpelier and a number of bills that frankly impact every professional sector here in the state, as well as our residents and community members. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack. I think the best thing for us to do today is really to welcome each one of these legislators up to at least speak a little bit about the committees they serve on and the bills that are currently under review and being presented. So with that, I'd love to welcome up Seth Baumgartz to speak a little bit about his roles.
The Vermont Housing and Finance Agency estimates that we need to build 40,000 units of housing in Vermont in the next 8 years, just to keep up with current demand. And obviously we need to focus that on low and moderate income Vermonters who are in the most need of housing. And we all know the stories about schools, your businesses everywhere, people who might have wanted to come to work in your business or work at the schools, and then they can't because they get here and they can't even find a place to live, so they don't come. So our municipal zoning ordinances were often developed in the 60s and 70s and even early 80s, and they often haven't changed a lot since. So what this bill does is look at some of the factors. So if we're going to build those 40,000 units of housing, the only place that makes sense to build them is downtowns. Otherwise, we're talking about building in farmland, we're talking about building in forest land, we're talking about sprawl. So the idea is to target housing to downtowns, where more and more people want to be, where they want walkability to services, they want access to services, and the underlying premise is that everybody deserves to have that, including low and moderate income Vermonters.
So I chair Senate Education. And everyone probably has seen in the papers the Supreme Court decision, Carson v. Macon, that says if you give to one independent school in your state, you have to give funds to all. And as we know, we have a really interesting landscape of education in Vermont. We have public schools, and we have a lot of independent schools, and within those independent schools, we have our academies, Vermont being one of them. On the other side of this, I would say most Vermonters don't want their public dollars going to religious institutions. Most Vermonters really do believe in the separation of church and state. So what I'm trying to navigate, and I thought we did a pretty good job of it last year, was keeping public dollars away from religious schools, as Carson v. Macon basically says, you give to one, you give to all. While at the same time not disrupting the educational landscape in Vermont. And by disrupting the educational landscape in Vermont, there is a Senate bill and a House bill that would greatly interrupt the educational landscape in Vermont. What those two bills do really is they both really say, all right, we're going to try to carve out some schools, such as Burton Academy and St. Johnsbury Academy and the other two academies, whether they can do it constitutionally or not, while letting all the other independent schools really stop getting funding. So that would be your Maple Streets, that would be your Long Trails, that would be the Village School in North Bennington. And really, for all intents and purposes, it would close a lot of schools down in this state.
So I'll just say a word or two about paid family leave, which I think a number of us in the room have supported. So the concept is universal paid family medical leave when you have a new child come into your family through birth or through adoption, when you have a medical issue with a family member and you need to take some time off. This would guarantee that no matter what you do for a living, that you would be able to take some time off and be paid for it. And it's similar to a bill that the House and Senate both approved 4 years ago, maybe now. It was vetoed by the governor, and we failed to override it by a single vote in the House. So it came that close to being enacted. The bill is a little more aggressive, I think, a little more ambitious this time, and it comes also in the context of the governor having unilaterally set up a non-universal bill, or a non-universal program that employers need to pay into, and that isn't universal. It doesn't have as generous a benefit.
The bill we've worked on the most for the last few weeks is the Universal School Meals Bill. So universal school meals have been the reality in Vermont for the past 3 school years, 2 with federal funding during COVID, and the last year with the 1-year funding that the legislature got through last year. This bill tries to make it permanent and tries to make sure that no matter where they are or who they are or what their situation is at home, kids are getting breakfast and lunch in school, and they're not going to school or leaving school hungry.
The past 3 years have been, since the COVID-19 pandemic and since what we are seeing in the drug supply, have been tragically fatal years for Vermonters. We broke a record in 2020. We then broke the record again in 2021, and it's looking like we're on track in 2022 to once again come in with, well over 200 Vermonters' lives lost per year to fatal overdose. Prior statistics show that about half of those lives lost are people aged 40 and under, right? So this is really, folks in our community, these deaths are preventable, and so we're really trying to do everything in our power to send services out, connect the supports to people who need it.
So I'm happy to talk more about the Paid Family Leave Bill, which is a really good bill. One of the key things that we wanted to make sure was that keep the contribution low, which is currently estimated at 0.5% of a payroll tax, and that would be split between employer and employee, and a benefit that actually is high enough that it allows people to make use of it. California has a similar program. Their benefit was 60% of payroll. They discovered that if you're making $15 an hour and your benefit would be 60% of that, you can't afford to take this leave even though you're paying into it. It's another chronic case of being underinsured. So we want to make sure it's not another underinsurance program, but an actual benefit.
So I will just say that what we're trying to do this year is balance out the very important priorities of family and medical leave insurance, which is something that did come through the House with 103 sponsors this year. That's got very broad support, and childcare. I believe, and I think a lot of my colleagues believe, that those policies are both very important to Vermont workers and to Vermont businesses. And I will just say that we always try to pay a great deal of attention to passing a balanced budget that Vermonters and businesses can afford. So how we're going to fund these bills is still going to be very much a work in progress. Right now, as Robin explained, and I don't anticipate this changing, FMLI is looking to the payroll tax. By making it universal and spreading that pool out across the entire state, we keep the contributions very low. As the bill goes through the legislative process, you very well may see it change or honestly contract it a little bit, right? Right now we're looking at 100% wage replacement. Maybe that'll change. So maybe that payroll contribution rate will drop. What I don't anticipate changing, but I'm trying to do a crystal ball thing here, is that 50-50 split between employers and employees.
After each legislator spoke, the audience had its turn to drill a little deeper.
I think one of our biggest challenges is affordable housing. As a workforce that We pay a moderate wage, more than the $15 an hour that we like to throw around. Affordable housing is a huge issue for our workforce. We can't even attract new staff to come to the area because there's nothing that is affordable in terms of housing or rentals in our area. Everything is out of market currently, and anything anyone can do anywhere, I'm sure other employers are facing the same thing, is going to be useful from our perspective.
I think Vermont has a reputation, deserve it or not, of being a high tax state. I remember when the sales tax was 3%. I've read also other states are looking at lowering taxes, but that doesn't ever seem to be on the table.
So we're in the chamber hat, Andy. We're watching where the funding sources for these bills is going to come from or start to take shape. Right now, it is looking like a lot of that will be carried by the taxes that already exist and the potential for some of those taxes to increase. Splitting that 0.5% is a great option. I think most of us believe that paid family and medical leave is a wonderful opportunity. We just have to look at how that will directly impact the bottom line of doing business here in Vermont, which, as you mentioned, is already incredibly difficult. We build 40,000 units, we bring all these people in, we have to make sure we have jobs for all.
I can talk a little bit about ideas that are circulating in the Ways and Means Committee around property taxes anyway. And I'd be curious to hear feedback on this. When we did the Tax Commission study, did a big report a couple of years ago on how we might, all kinds of ways, and I've actually read it. It's actually a really interesting 200-page report, but it was about all kinds of ways in which Vermont might consider restructuring or, revising its tax code in the coming years. And one of the ideas that continually comes up is, and feel free to reach out to me anytime with ideas on this, is the concept of shifting from property taxes to income taxes as a way to pay for our education system. And I think that's something that's not like fast track front burner this year, but it's an idea that keeps coming up.
Brian Maggiato, a current board member of the Southwestern Vermont Chamber of Commerce, noted that the business community was interested in how some of the proposals being advanced were supposed to be paid for and how they would impact businesses.
So, I think really the primary focus for every business should be how much is it going to cost me to continue to do business here in Vermont. We've seen taxes being applied as potential revenue or funding sources for a lot of these legislative priorities, and I think for the most part, most Vermonters support a lot of these priorities, but it can't be on the backs of each one of our small businesses. And there, as the representatives mentioned, there has to be a perfect balance between being a Vermonter and being able to do business in Vermont, both for Vermonters and for the 13 million people that come to experience the joys of our state.
Legislators headed back up north for another week before town meeting, usually a midway point in the session, when they'll be back to attend town meetings and hear from constituents about some of the major issues that have the potential to be enacted into law. Much more to come on all of this. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.